Hello and welcome to TRSA's Global Textile Services Market Analysis webinar. I'm Joseph Ricci, TRSA President and CEO, and I'm pleased to host today's program. Thank you all for joining us. Before we begin, I'd like to thank our event sponsors for helping make this presentation possible, including the National Associations of Germany, DTV, Belgium, FBT, the Laundry Association of Australia, LLA, and Textile Services Association of the UK. Thank you. We also have two event sponsors, Textile International, which has been rescheduled to the 27th of November through the 1st of December, 2021 in Frankfurt, and the Middle East Cleaning Technology Week, 24th of February through the 26th of January, 24th of January through the 26th of January at the Dubai World Trade Center. Now we'll see a short clip from the Middle East Cleaning Technology Week. Thank you, World Technology Cleaning Week. I'd also like to thank our sponsor, CleanText, a global manufacturer distributor of high-quality mats, for their support of this program, and the rescheduled World Textile Services Congress, the 1st and 2nd of December, 2021, in conjunction with Textile International in Frankfurt, Germany. Today's program will begin with an overview of the first ever Global Textile Services Market Analysis conducted by the Economist Intelligence Unit, followed by an interactive panel of international industry executives. If you have any questions throughout the program, please type them into the question box on the right of your screen. You can download the slides from today's presentation via the handouts pane on your control screen, which is also on the right. Today's webinar and all TRSA webinars are recorded and available in the TRSA On-Demand Learning Center that includes nearly 150 industry-specific safety, production, compliance, and marketing webinars, training videos, and other e-learning courses. Following the program, you'll be prompted to complete a short evaluation. Please complete this evaluation and give us your feedback, as it helps us improve our programs and develop new content. Now let's get started. Our keynote speaker is Claire Casey, Global Managing Director of the Economist Intelligence Unit's Public Policy Practice. Claire manages teams on 3 continents, generating evidence-based insights to inform internal strategy and external engagement for governments, international institutions, corporations, foundations, and NGOs around the world. Her work has appeared in the Financial Times, the International Economy, America's Quarterly, the Daily Beast, and Foreign Policy. Claire is going to share with us an exclusive presentation of the first ever Global Textile Services Market Analysis that spans the impact of 5 demand sectors on markets in 13 countries across 6 regions of the world. Her colleague, Vaibhav Sahgal, will join us for some Q&A after her presentation. It is my pleasure now to turn the program over to Claire.
Thank you so much, Joe. And I'm just delighted to be here to present some of the findings from what we feel is really a groundbreaking piece of work for the industry. So I'll start out, I have a presentation to share, and we'll just start jumping to the 4th slide in the presentation where we get to the real content. So starting out to say, why did we undertake this study? It was born out of a recognition that there was a lack of objective data and analysis to guide investment decisions around geographic expansion and broader strategic planning efforts of companies operating in the global textile services industry. It was a challenging undertaking. What we found is that in developing countries across the world, governments aren't actually reporting disaggregated economic data, things like gross value added, output contribution, employment, etc., specifically for the textile services industry. More often than not, we found that the textile services data was condensed into textile manufacturing, it was slotted into a broad economic category like other service activities, or it was not reported at all, even as part of another aggregate. So we worked to overcome that challenge and come up with a creative way of getting at the an objective, data-driven view of the industry and its forecast going forward. And so what we looked at was a demand side perspective. So we looked at 5 key sectors that make up the bulk of global demand for textile services. That's construction, oil and gas, healthcare, hotels, and manufacturing. Then we looked at 13 economies, developed and developing, across 5 regions. And I'll expand a bit on the selection of those in a moment. For all the countries and sectors, we constructed a 5-year forecast, 2020 through 2024, with 2 key indicators for economic health: gross value added, and employment. All of our forecasts were carefully curated based on historical indicator performance, systematic and unsystematic, and endogenous and exogenous impacts, structural changes like the disruption to global supply chains that we've seen in the COVID pandemic. This is all based on the EIU's country and industry level core macroeconomic performance assumptions, which I will lay out in some detail. And testing and simulations were done to ensure the credibility of the output. All of this was done using an econometric time series regression model that was developed by the EIU specifically for this engagement. We also developed company profiles for 10 major textile services companies as part of the research. And the idea here was to gain a better sense of the key trends in the industry and how companies are coping with the negative implications of the pandemic. Much of the analysis in these profiles was based on either publicly reported data or came from an expert interview program that we did with representatives from these companies. So turning to geographic scope, that's the next slide. We wanted to make sure that in choosing the countries to be included in this analysis, that we ensured that we could actually say credibly that this was a global industry analysis. So we selected 13 countries that together account for over 70% of global GDP and almost 60% of the world's population. But they weren't just the biggest countries. We also looked to have a mix of frontier and emerging economies. We wanted to have varied levels of maturity in their textile services industries. And we also accounted for the importance of the 5 key demand sectors in each country's economy, as well as the business environment in each country. So ultimately, the list of 13 that we arrived at includes Australia, Brazil, Canada, China, France, Germany, India, Japan, Mexico, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, the UK, and the United States. So moving forward and thinking about how we approach this study and the sort of big findings that came out of this, and we'll go into a lot more depth on each of these. But I wanted to start by giving a sort of high-level view of the findings. And we found that COVID-19 has severely impacted demand for both key product and service categories: workwear, which has actually been harder hit, and flat linen, which has been less impacted. However, across the 5-year forecast period, we see workwear and flat linen demand stabilizing, recovering to 2019 levels, and even growing marginally in some of the countries included in the study. Workwear demand will depend on the economic recovery, specifically employment levels across construction, oil and gas, and the manufacturing sectors. In the flat linen category, we see robust demand continuing through 2024, although flat linen demand from hotels has taken a serious hit due to declines in personal and business travel. The hotel sector is expected to recover to 2019 levels after 2022. Growth in the textile service industry will come from expansion into emerging economies and further penetration into frontier markets through diversification, consolidation, and differentiation of products and services. In developing countries, we see the textile services market as mature, and this is a clear use case, with a clear use case and relatively stable demand. However, in some developed countries, we observed increasing demand for add-on services, things like the provision of reusable face masks and isolation gowns, sanitizers, and surgical kits. And these could provide new avenues for growth, specifically in North America and Europe over this time horizon. And finally, we saw consolidation and vertical integration as key trends that will continue in developing economies, with the aim of achieving economies of scale. To stay competitive, small firms will focus on niche, differentiated offerings, such as flat linen services for Airbnb owners. Other industry trends include a significant investment coming in automation, the growing importance of product and geographic portfolio diversification, the standardization and implementation of stringent hygiene standards, and the prioritization of sustainability practices across demand sectors. And again, we'll go into each of these key findings in much greater depth over the next several minutes. So we're going to start with a macro outlook. Demand for textile services across the globe is inextricably linked with the performance of the global economy, especially our 5 key sectors. So I wanted to start with an overview of the global economic outlook, specifically our core assumptions around the pandemic, the EIU's forecast for the global economic performance through 2024, a regional and country economic performance deeper dive into a few highlighted regions and countries, and some key risks associated with the forecast. Starting with the pandemic and how it is likely to play out. Our assumptions in the EIU is that the intensity of the pandemic in the coming period will depend on national and country level decisions taken to contain the outbreak. We assume that the virus will continue to spread around the world until a vaccine is rolled out successfully globally, not just in major markets. We also assume that 20% of the symptomatic cases will be severe and only 1% will result in death. Based on these assumptions, we believe that it will be impossible to suppress the virus. Instead, governments are trying to flatten the caseload curve to create capacity in hospitals to treat critically ill people. And that while we do believe that a vaccine will be available by the end of 2021, logistics around the vaccine and its distribution globally will be tricky. And there's also some possibility that the vaccine may not be 100% effective or may not be developed at all. Based on those assumptions, how do we think about economic recovery? In this next slide, I'm going to offer our view of the journey to a global economic recovery, highlighting where regions diverge based on their economic structure, demographics, and especially their fiscal response through policies and interventions to deal with the implications of the pandemic. Under the assumption that the worst of the pandemic will be felt this year, and that people will develop some immunity to the virus after infection, the EIU believes that global output will contract by 5.2% this year from forecasted growth originally at the start of the year of 2.3%. It's also believed that global GDP growth will not recover to its pre-pandemic levels at least before 2022, and that 2020 and 2021 will be viewed as lost years for growth. We also expect that until we have a return, the emergence of a safe and effective vaccine, there will be no return to normalcy. As a result, local outbreaks and lockdowns will be expected through 2021, putting most countries under severe continued economic, fiscal, and social strain. Rich countries are well placed to sustain the high levels of debt that we expect during this scenario, given the low interest rates. We expect that the most likely scenario for advanced economies is one of low growth and low inflation and high levels of debt. However, some emerging countries will find themselves on the brink of sovereign default as their debt piles up. Many will have no choice but to restructure debt in the medium term. To look at the US, COVID-19 has hit the US economy hard, and it's expected to rebound to pre-pandemic levels only by Q3 of 2022. And to turn to our other big global behemoth, China emerges as the only economy that will record positive growth of 1.7% this year and rebound to 12.4% growth in Q2 after recording a slump in Q1 across all economic sectors. Moving to the next slide, some context here. the story of how COVID-19 is impacting regions and how regions will recover back to 2019 activity levels is really varied. Western Europe will take the biggest macroeconomic hit through 2020 and 2021, but the Middle East, Africa, and Latin America are also really deeply affected and are expected to experience prolonged and slow recoveries. The APAC region is the least impacted, and we expect it to be the quickest to rebound. I'm just looking at time, and given the time we have for this presentation, I'm not going to go into depth by region beyond what I just shared, and just jump to the next slide. So what are the downside risks? They are high. Forecasting is not an exact science, and there are a multitude of underlying factors that could change the assumptions that went into these forecasts and dramatically alter our view. So what we tried to do here is capture the three biggest downside risks we see. The first is the uncontained spread of the pandemic driving economies into deeper recession than expected. There are two sides to this risk scenario. One is that the virus remains uncontained into 2021, leading to renewed and strict lockdowns, especially if any immunity developed proves to be short-lived, only lasting a few months, which has been suggested by some recent data. And the second risk is that regardless of the virus's trend, job markets struggle to bounce back. Travel and demand for non-essential goods remaining suppressed for the foreseeable future. These risks could be confounded if we don't have an effective vaccine for the virus by late 2021, which again is contrary to our baseline assumptions. The second big downside risk is around sovereign default and financial contagion. In countries that have already built up large-scale US dollar-denominated debt, they'll be needing to borrow further in order to stimulate their damaged economies. And there is a risk that additional currency depreciations will lead to sovereign default, especially in poorer countries. Given the destruction of investor sentiment for emerging markets, one sovereign default could lead to another, and we could see the contagion effects that we haven't seen in really decades in emerging markets. Finally, an escalating US-China trade war could force a split in the global economy. Despite the first phase trade deal that the US and China signed in January and the domestic distractions of dealing with coronavirus, there is the risk of an escalation in the trade war, stemming mostly from strategic competition in the technology space. The supposed Chinese origin of the coronavirus will exacerbate these tensions as the US continues, at least at the executive level, to blame China for the virus. And China is looking to solidify its global standing by offering financial and technical support to poorer countries. You could see a gradual bifurcation in the global economy that might start as a slow-moving trend, but its longer impact could be quite significant, with multinational companies having to realign their supply chains to accommodate it, and trading blocs torn between the US and China and those political tensions. So with that broad view from the EIU, we'll turn now to demand sector outlooks. And start with, and I'll just jump right into the first demand sector rather than going through this outlook. So if we could just go right to construction, I'm conscious of time. So for the construction sector, the global recession triggered by COVID-19 is expected to constrain sectoral growth through 2020 and 2021. This output slump will be coupled with labor shortages and unemployment in differing markets, driving down demand for workwear. And so that's a trend we expect to see just over the next year and a half or so. We expect to see a recovery starting in 2022. With interest rates at near zero, the construction sector should benefit from cheap access to credit. And you can see the development of major infrastructure projects taking advantage of low financing costs. Rapid continued urbanization is also likely to spur workwear demand. And finally, the COVID-19 pandemic I'm getting a message that my connection is not working. Is everyone able to still hear me? Did someone indicate whether or not
Yes.
there's? Okay,
We
thank
can
you.
hear you.
Notification from GoToWebinar and wanted to confirm. So the pandemic has pushed governments to increasingly raise the safety standards. And so we expect there to be greater demand for especially safety equipment, high visibility desks, and personal protective equipment. Construction firms are also moving towards workwear that is more athletic, unique, and comfortable, which could create opportunities for textile services firms to diversify their product offerings. Turning now to oil and gas. Growth in the oil and gas sector is expected to be quite slow through 2024, driven both by the oil price slump and declining demand as commercial spaces close. That's for electricity and gas demand. The renewable energy sector is expected to see strong growth, particularly in developed economies. However, renewables are low soil industries and tend to be less reliant on workwear. So we expect that demand for workwear from the energy sector broadly will be hit by that. Global oil and gas production is expected to decline by 4.2% in 2020 in North America, and the G7 bloc is expected to see sizable reductions in production over that period. So that will pull down demand for workwear. And much like in construction, we are seeing increased regulation and the demand for more specialized protective garments in this sector. For example, in the United States, OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, is rolling out standards that could drive demand for new products. Similar standards and demand for different kinds of workwear are expected across developed countries, especially in the wake of COVID-19. Healthcare is a better story for the industry. Healthcare spending is going to spike, particularly in developed countries that are engaged in the development of vaccines. Developing countries are also investing more in healthcare infrastructure and are increasingly deploying national insurance schemes, which could increase healthcare demand. One would expect it to. Across all the demand sectors, healthcare recorded the smallest decline in GVA in 2020, and we're expecting to see the quickest recovery in this sector. Sectoral growth is expected to plateau in about 2024 as healthcare spending stabilizes to pre-pandemic levels. We're also seeing, again here, a growing demand for non-traditional products, PPE, masks, scrubs, and the emergence of new subsectors like nursing homes to service a growing global aging population that could offer new opportunities for this industry to solidify its market position and diversify its product offerings. And turning now to hotels. Even prior to the pandemic, non-traditional disruptors such as Airbnb were challenging the growth in the hotel sector. But they've also provided opportunities for smaller textile services companies to focus on these niche markets. We're projecting the hotel sector will struggle globally, but particularly in China, India, Saudi Arabia, and South Africa, with annual growth slowing to 1/3 of its pre-pandemic levels in each country. In the US and Europe, we expect to see more of a shift from international travel to domestic tourism, which could buoy the industry. Given these factors, we expect the crisis to subside by about the end of 2021 and then to see activity pick up in 2022. In developing markets with very few large hotel groups, on-premise laundries are common. However, as these markets develop and attract larger chains, we're expecting to see hotels seeking assurance for their customers of strong hygiene and disinfection practices, and the awareness of and demand for professional textile services could start to increase in 2022. And finally, turning to manufacturing. Manufacturing, as we all know, is particularly sensitive to macroeconomic cycles. And we expect the global recession to limit sectoral growth through the end of 2021. And then we expect to see economic activity in the sector begin to recover in the second half of the forecast period, supporting a stable medium-term outlook and steady workwear demand to 2024. However, given that the manufacturing sector in developed economies is moving away from heavy soil subsectors like steel production to more low soil subsectors like automotive manufacturing, home cleaning is emerging as a more viable alternative to textile services, which could restrict growth going forward. And finally, another interesting trend we see is how manufacturers are increasingly investing in light, fashionable, personalized items in order to attract younger labor and to strengthen their brand identity. And we see that as a phenomenon that could be a real opportunity for agile textile services firms. So having discussed the global outlook and demand side factors, I want to use the next few slides to summarize what these trends mean for the textile services companies in the industry itself. We expect stalled economic activity and increasing unemployment will weaken demand for textile services through 2021. However, emerging markets will provide meaningful avenues for growth in the industry. Developing countries are expected to record quicker growth as they are less impacted by the pandemic. However, frontier markets are expected to see slower growth as they work a bit harder to revive their economies in the aftermath. The level of penetration of the textile services industry varies significantly based on a country's development status. Developed economies are highly penetrated and undergoing consolidation. Developing countries are highly untapped and have fragmented markets, but with high potential. We see untapped demand for flat linen, especially in emerging economies. Stable healthcare demand and growing demand from hotels will also support growth in this segment, but post-2022. Demand for workwear will be supported by lower unemployment and economic recovery of the construction and manufacturing sectors. But there's a sort of double-edged sword there, and we are expecting tighter labor markets to present challenges, both for demand, but also for the provision of textile services across developed markets. And finally, the COVID-19 pandemic and the increasing environmental consciousness will push firms to prioritize sustainable practices and to invest in compliance with strict hygiene and safety regulations, particularly in healthcare and food manufacturing subsectors. Globally, we're going to take a view of the world and just hit some key markets. We expect textile services demand to remain stable through 2024, but there's significant variation by region. And so if we could move to the map slide. In North America, we see a mature industry that's reached around 70% penetration. Challenges around labor costs and availability, low demand from hotels are downside risks for the industry in the forecast period through 2024. And the outlook is quite similar for Western Europe. There is a significant market opportunity for workwear demand across construction and manufacturing, specifically in Latin America. Saudi Arabia is also an interesting story. Despite historically low oil prices, we see Saudi Arabia as a growth hotspot due to government spending on healthcare and infrastructure that should support higher demand for textile services. And aging populations are also a positive long-term growth story, particularly in a super aged society like Japan and a rapidly aging market like China, which should drive demand from the healthcare sector. This, coupled with stable manufacturing output, should support industry demand in those regions. And in developing countries, including China and India, key challenges for the industry include low awareness of textile services and high levels of fragmentation. You view it as a challenge or also an opportunity for those companies that are able to meet those challenges. Turning to our next slide, where do we see contribution to industry growth? And you'll see in this visual, what we've tried to do is simplify this to just show you what's flat and what's declining. So just to echo what we've already covered in the presentation, construction is basically flat across the period. It declines in 2020, but we see it recovering owing to infrastructure investment and continued urbanization. Oil and gas, we see a secular decline, not just related to the current economic situation, and that will continue over the forecast period. Healthcare is a more positive story. As life expectancy increases, populations age rapidly, and public healthcare spending goes up, the demand is going to increase in this sector, not just over the forecast period, but for decades to come. And this will support demand for textile services. In the near term, the pandemic has actually led to a drop in demand from from a decline in elective procedures in hospitals, but workwear for isolation gowns, reusable masks, etc., are supporting a relatively stable outlook. Hotels like oil and gas, we expect to be a drag on industry growth as it dampens, as hotels work to stabilize their operations and address sustainability concerns. We do expect activity to pick up after 2022, and there could be a turnaround versus the oil and gas story, which is more of a secular decline. And finally, in manufacturing, demand for workwear will remain stable through 2024, despite the negative near-term impacts of the pandemic. And drivers of increased manufacturing demand include clean room laundry services and new offerings developed to meet hygiene and workplace safety standards. Turning now to some key trends that we saw across the industry. The first is consolidation. And this is not a new trend, and it's nothing that the individuals on this call aren't familiar with, but we expect for the mega trend of consolidation and vertical integration to continue. Across Europe, the major drivers of industry consolidation are geographic diversification, improved margins, and the potential for multi-service approaches. Cash flow concerns among smaller firms have also improved the prospects of those larger players looking to expand via acquisition. Diversification is also a major trend going forward. Demand for customized textile services has enabled firms to diversify well beyond their core offerings and has supported earnings, particularly in this difficult economic situation. Textile services firms have been able to reach less penetrated demand subsectors, such as long-term care facilities or elder care facilities, and provide add-on services to existing customers, such as first aid kits and sanitizers in response to COVID-19. We also expect to see technology investment to continue going forward, not just driven by the COVID-19 pandemic, but increasing labor costs and labor shortages, really driving increased investment in technology and automation. We see players across the sector adopting digital tools to optimize internal processes and enhance efficiency. And finally, sustainability. Regulatory interventions across resource utilization, energy, water, etc., have supported a reduction in the industry's environmental footprint. The reusable nature of linen has also highlighted the broader sustainable nature of the industry. Regulators, especially in European markets, are pushing businesses to adopt zero-waste product and service delivery models, and the textile service industries is an integral part of a solution for its key demand sectors. I want to turn now to the company analysis that we did. And again, this was driven by both literature review and in-depth interviews with individuals and representatives from these leading companies. And it's to really bring greater texture to the analysis. So what we asked was, how are firms, how have they been impacted by the pandemic? How are they dealing with the negative implications of the current economic environment? Has it forced them to delay planned strategic investment plans? What are the key pillars of growth and best practices going forward? So those were the framing questions that guided this bit of the analysis. So I'm going to start with just a snapshot of what we heard from these firms in terms of their priorities. And number one was attention to the balance sheet. So looking at reducing costs, improving efficiency, and protecting cash flows while maintaining revenues. Firms across the sectors have furloughed and laid off employees while struggling with inadequate government support. We're hearing from firms that they're placing considerable importance on customization and innovation to meet evolving customer needs, but particularly around safety and hygiene today in the demand that firms are seeing in the middle of the pandemic. The customer base. So how do you diversify your customer base, create new relationships, and deepen key account client relationships to retain them post 2020 as a strategic focus of companies. And finally, technology. Planned investment in automation is expected to continue through 2024 based on what we're hearing from these 10 leading companies in the sector. And in many cases, what we heard is it's even more urgent because of the pandemic, which has exacerbated people management through physical limitations at laundry sites. So digitization and investment in technology-enabled inventory management processes are really enabling operational efficiency. Our analysis suggests that going forward, to enjoy sustainable business growth, companies are also going to have to be thinking about industry best practices, which we'll turn to next. So what are those? Investing in automation. So if you look at automation as something that will constrain supply side costs in the long term, firms are investing in technology sooner to reap these benefits. Automation in developed countries carries the greatest benefits because of the cost of labor and potential labor shortages. Companies are embracing sustainability. Stringent hygiene and environmental conservation standards across the world are really driving firms to prioritize sustainable practices, to stay competitive, and build their credibility in the marketplace. This supports brand image and enables firms to position themselves as an environmentally conscious supplier or partner. Echoing what we said before, they're vertically integrating, and so the consolidation in the industry has encouraged a higher quality of service provision. We see companies forging ventures and acquiring smaller players to allow firms to grow their market share, and partnerships, allowing smaller firms to benefit from the improved cash flow and greater potential to expand their customer base. We see companies prioritizing developing economies as developed markets become saturated. There is this real opportunity that can be unlocked in developing economies, and this can be done through joint ventures with local market players to allow a provider to break into what is today a generally fragmented and highly competitive local market. And finally, the push into specialized markets through portfolio diversification and even repurposing of production lines to be a source of revenue growth going forward. So what is the way forward after we've done all of this research? And I always think as a professional in this space, you know that you've done something interesting when it produces more questions. We view this study as really groundbreaking and providing for the first time a really detailed data-driven analysis of demand sectors and what their performance means for the industry. But what it's also provoked is our thinking on what more, again, evidence-driven and data-driven insights could inform the industry and its strategic decision-making. And the first is really connecting these broader economic trends and demand side trends to the financial performance of industry players. And so that's one opportunity to really drive the understanding of the relationship between the broader trends and company level financial performance. The second is a deep dive on regulation. Contrary to many industries, regulation is helpful here. Regulations around hygiene, the judicious use of inputs and resources, and safety standards can really be enablers of growth in the textile services industry. It's generally challenging to foresee regulatory developments or labor market bottlenecks. And so proactive, well-informed, and timely investments in developing a better understanding of the regulatory and labor market landscape in countries could really inform the industry and inform its investment decisions. And finally, better understanding the competitive landscape, essentially a sentiment analysis, knowing our 10 company deep dive taken more broadly to get a better sense of what peers are doing, how they're navigating these challenges, where they're seeing opportunity, and really enable that exchange of best practices and innovation across the sector. So I will close with that. And we are here, both me and Vaibhav, who is the brains in this operation and really the force behind this piece of work, to answer any questions you might have on the study and any of the findings we shared today.
Great, thank you, Claire. That was very informative. So, bye, Bob. If you'd like to rejoin us, looking here for questions from the group. If you've got any questions for Claire, and as she said, bye, Bob has been working on this thing. Geez, over a year now. We originally were going to release the report in March, and obviously COVID changed that whole experience for us. So we had to start something from scratch in some of these areas to really build out the report. So. Looking for some questions from the audience here for Claire or for Vaibhav on the report itself. One of the questions that I had was, you mentioned the continued urbanization, and I think that's, do you see any impact from COVID on the urbanization, on this continued trend towards urbanization?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question, and I think it's a bigger question. There's a sort of fundamental question we're asking, which is, does COVID accelerate trends we're already seeing? Does it create real U-turns in the direction that industries were going, demographic change? I would say in the case of urbanization, I cannot imagine a future where the trend towards urbanization does not continue apace. I don't think that proximity during these periods of infection and concern over that will change the broader drivers that are so powerful, whether it's access to services. You see rural communities around the world have really been sort of emptied out of services. You could see, you could potentially see a future, and we're seeing countries do really interesting things, using technology to enable the provision of services to more distant communities. But from my mind, even though our world has been rocked by COVID, the trends behind urbanization are so powerful. I would be disinclined to take up the view that trend will go anywhere.
Thank you, Vaibhav. Anything to add to that? Or?
I think it's also particularly interesting. I broadly agree with everything that Claire just mentioned, but just to build on that a little bit, we and the UN population data, for example, from where these leading urbanization estimates come, have kind of said that around 60% of the world's population is going to live in urbanized areas going forward in the next 5 years. COVID-19 pandemic, like you say, Joe, and we've spoken about this many times before, has increased a little bit of the reverse urbanization effect, but that is due to desperate situations, right? Desperate situations call for desperate measures. However, I do believe that the long-term outlook is broadly still in line, and we will see increasing urbanization, in fact, quite rapidly increasing urbanization in the already populous countries of India, China, and a bunch of other developing nations kind of at the forefront of this trend. Yeah.
Thank you, Vaibhav and Claire. I've got a question here from the audience, and it may be a little bit of a stretch for you guys, but the question is, what do you see in terms of for this market sector, loss in capacity due to foreclosures or bankruptcies, or just companies not being able to survive the pandemic and be able to continue to operate?
I'm going to turn to Vaibhav, who's much closer to the analysis, but I would just say from a general perspective that we always see these periods of creative destruction. And it reinforces, that question sort of reinforces some of the analytical conclusions around consolidation and vertical integration, where there will potentially be new opportunities created by, unfortunately, the inability of some companies to survive this period. Vaibhav, do you have a more detailed view here from the research?
Actually, this is one of the things that is definitely that should definitely be the way forward for this analysis, and it wasn't really 100% within scope, but really my answer to that question, Joe, would be agility is key. So agility in terms of your operational model, your service delivery model, your ability to repurpose your production or manufacturing lines to support this fairly temporary increase in requirement of add-on products, isolation gowns, masks, scrubs and disinfectants, sanitizers, for example, has definitely helped a lot of firms deal with the damaging implications of the pandemic. Other than that, Claire already hinted towards this, but consolidation, vertical integration, diversification, temporarily specializing in particular services that are giving you more demand. And another thing that you mentioned, Claire, that's important here is leveraging or better leveraging your existing strong relationships with those demand sectors that are seeing increased demand. The agility to be able to do these things in the time of the pandemic, together with any kind of government incentives that are available to firms in your sector, will be key to operational and financial viability as we all cope with the damaging implications of COVID-19.
Thanks. We got another question here from the group talking about it's a statement and a question. So over the last 6 months, workwear has been performing better, and I can say in talking to folks that's true. A lot of that has been the fact that they were able to, improve productivity, cut staff, be able to work more efficiently, and they want to know if that's been the case over the last few months. Why would flat linen then become more of a potential going forward in terms of growth and opportunities?
I'll leave that one to Vaibhav, who did the forecasting.
Sure. I would say that this is for a few key reasons. One is the penetration of the global textile services industry across sectors globally. Our analysis seems to suggest that it is really the healthcare and the hotel sector, the key demand side for flat linen, that are relatively less penetrated, especially the hotel sector from a global perspective, as compared to the other sectors, which are construction, energy, oil and gas, and manufacturing. That's one of the key stories. And the second story is really the reliance or the dependence of economies seeing healthcare and hotels, healthcare especially, as a kind of a critical infrastructure sector. A lot of increased spending plans, and our report covers this extensively. But the reason that we see great demand coming from healthcare in future for flat linen is because we see massive increases and are expecting massive increases in national healthcare spending in most countries around the globe. This is a sector that does not record, rapid growth like manufacturing or energy might, where you're seeing 8 to 10% growth per year in a country like China. This is a sector that grows at a steady 2 to 3% across years, which is really quite significant just considering the size of the sector, the number of persons that the sector services, the increases in capacity, things like that. So just looking at a lot of these reasons, our opinion is, one, lower penetration in the sector, especially in developing economies, and two, higher national healthcare expenditure expected in critical infrastructure on healthcare especially, that is going to drive a fairly robust demand for flat linen across the globe.
Thank you.
That question around a bit, though, it was interesting how it was constructed, because it talked about operational efficiency and company performance, and then our forecast. And I think we do want to be clear to everyone participating today that our forecast is really about the demand side of the market, and not about the outside of the best practices analysis, not really doing a deep dive yet into how we can connect that broader demand picture to company performance. It sounds like some really interesting things are happening in terms of process optimization.
Thank you, Claire. Another question here is talking about again, back to some of the flat linen type questions, and this it's talking about with restaurants look like in some cases maybe going out of business, and 60% in the U.S. is kind of the guess, and I'm sure worldwide there's other estimates there. How does that sector respond? And I think you talked a little bit about it when talking about diversity, market diversity, product diversity, things of that nature. Any other thoughts around that? And then we'll have one last question after that. So.
Yeah, I mean, diversification is definitely the core, and I think I said it, and I heard Vaibhav say it in 2 answers ago, the word agility. So I think that these moments are incredibly complicated and challenging, and there will be companies that don't survive. But the ones that are sort of agile and quick-footed and see new opportunities will be the ones that come out of it stronger, I would say, than they entered it probably. Vaibhav, do you have anything to add?
Absolutely, it's all about the resilience of the balance sheet with this. If you look at developing versus developed economies, our demand sector outlooks for the hotels sector touches on this quite extensively. What we are expecting is that the lower budget or the lower cost operations will actually recover a lot faster than the more upscale operations in the hotel sector. This is a trend that we're seeing. We do feel like there is a little bit of temporary relief for the sector, especially in key developed economies like the United States and Canada, which are already starting to see a pickup in operations of restaurants. Come the end of this month, actually, a lot of restaurants in the United States are going to be able to actually restart their indoor seating, which of course will allow them to scale up the amount of customers that are being serviced. And we also feel like kind of temporary trend that is offering some support or some relief to the sector is the increase in domestic travel that we are actually seeing in countries like the United States. It is a very rough time. There's kind of no way around it, but as agile as operators in the space can be, and as much as they can enjoy any of the fiscal incentives that are being offered, would be key not only to recovery but largely the sustenance of operators in the space.
All right, one last question, and then we'll bring in our panelists. So, any thoughts about as they call it, the emphasis on hyper hygiene awareness and its impact, like less socialization, more working from home, as you mentioned, stronger regulations to help industry. Do you see any, when that might start to dissipate at all?
It's interesting. I think we've tried to put front and center into the forecast the question of when a vaccine is available, not just available, but actually distributed globally. And our view is that until you see effective global distribution of a vaccine that works, that you will not see a return to normalcy. You will see the continuation of these behaviors, and they will continue to drag on the economy. So we are expecting an end of 2021 vaccine dissemination, but that is the big question mark. If that doesn't happen on that time frame, the path to recovery looks a lot slower.
All right. Thank you, Vaibhav and Claire. Appreciate your insights and for covering the report. For more detailed country and regional opportunities and forecasts, as well as demand, sectors outlook and impact on textile services and the detailed corporate briefs, the nearly 150-page Global Textile Services Market Analysis Report is available on the TRSA website at www.trsa.org/global markets. Thank you, Vaibhav and Claire. I appreciate you joining us this morning, and we'll bring you back when we're done with the panelists for some additional Q&A. So I'd like to ask the panelists now to turn on their cameras so we can see them. And I'd like to welcome the panel of Global Textile Services executives to discuss their perspectives on the international textile services market, the impact of the pandemic, and the industry's recovery. Again, if you have questions, please use the question panel as we go through the process. Our panelists today are Jim Kearns, Executive Vice President, Alsco Linen and Uniform Rental Services, Juha Lorio, CEO of Lindstrom, Harley Oaten, Executive General Manager of Spotless, Henning Siemens, Regional Managing Director of Workwear, CWS, and on video camera is Mr. Pan Wee, Executive Chairman and Secretary General of the China Laundry Association. So first, I'm going to go around the panelists and have them briefly introduce themselves, including information about their company's markets and services, and to offer a brief update regarding the industry's pre-COVID, the impact of the pandemic and recovery process. So I'll start with Jim Kearns, if you'll kick us off.
Okay, Joe, I assume you can hear me?
We can.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to participate on the panel today. I hope that everyone participating on the call and their families are safe and healthy. My name is Jim Kearns. I'm the Executive Vice President and Chief Financial Officer for Alsco. I have worked for Alsco for 27 years. Alsco is a privately held multinational company headquartered in Salt Lake City, Utah. The company started operations over 130 years ago. Bob and Kevin Steiner, Alsco's current CEOs, are the fourth generation of Steiners to lead the company. Alsco operates over 160 processing facilities in 13 countries and employed 20,000 people prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. Alsco provides linen and uniform services to businesses in many market segments, including food and beverage, hotel or hospitality, industrial, medical, and facility services. In North America, Alsco operates mostly mixed plants that service customers primarily in the food and beverage industry. In the UK, Alsco operates linen plants that service customers primarily in the hotel industry in London and the surrounding regions. COVID-19 has had a significant impact on Alsco's operations in North America and in the UK. The impact of the pandemic has been less severe in other countries where Alsco operates. In 2019, over 55% of Alsco's revenues were in North America. Now, this percentage will obviously decrease in 2020 due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Juha?
Oh, good morning, good afternoon, depending on your location. So my name is Juha Laurio, President and CEO for Lindström Group. And Lindström Group is over 170 years old, privately owned company. Our head office is in Helsinki in Finland, which is located in the northern part of Europe. We have totally over 80 facilities, employing more than 4,600 employees in totally in 24 countries in Europe and in Asia. And we have a very large variety of different textile services which we are offering to our customers, which are also from the very different customer segments. For our company, sustainability has always been high on our agenda, and it is now, and it is for the future as well. We want to be seen as a forerunner in this industry on sustainability. And sustainability is embedded to all our activities, and all our activities are really targeted to create added value for our customers. Concerning this COVID period, so far, and I highlight so far, thanks to our very diversified customer base, the impact has not been that severe for us. Naturally, some of our customer segments, like hospitality, they have suffered more, but there's of course is also some industries which have actually grown significantly during these times, like pharmaceutical industry. I think this period just highlights very well the importance of our industry and how essential we are to keep the societies running, and so very proud to work for the industry.
Thank you, Juha. Harley?
Thanks, Joe. Welcome from Australia. Good evening. It's a bit late over here, nearly midnight. Harley Oaten, Executive General Manager of Spotless. Spotless has been around since 1946. We started as a single-funded dry cleaning operation here in Melbourne. We've been through various ownership structures, both publicly listed on the Australian Stock Exchange and privately owned. We're currently owned by Downer, or 88% owned by Downer Group, which is a large Australian listed company. We turn over about 13 billion here in Australia. We employ about 50,000 people across the business. The laundry business, we operate 13 facilities through Australia and New Zealand. We're predominantly in the healthcare linen market, so most of our market through healthcare, both government and private healthcare here, and into the aged care sector. We do also have garment workwear business. About 20% of our business is garment workwear, and we do some hospitality work as well. So we've got around 1,400 staff across our facilities in Australia and New Zealand. In terms of the COVID impact in our countries, it was not as heavily impacted by case numbers as some of the other countries globally. However, we had in Australia and New Zealand, really strict lockdowns and tight restrictions, so that's heavily impacted business. Tourism and immigration effectively stopped. Elective surgeries reduced for a period and ceased. They've since picked back up, and food and beverage sort of facilities closed, sporting arenas and stadia closed as well. So key market sources for us. We're now sort of reopening, so we've been through really 3 phases. I guess the early phase for us back in March and April was around business continuity, making sure we could continue stock and PPE, supporting our staff, that sort of thing. Then as the volumes dropped down, it was around sort of cost control and reducing planned hours and looking at IR, HR structures, and now it's more around return to normal, how we bring the business back up through those times. So our focus on health has certainly helped us. We've seen growth in that area as the elective surgeries have turned back on. Things like reusable textiles, as mentioned earlier, have been a good growth source for us. Isolation gowns, aged care, and further outsourcing opportunities there as well. Accommodation remains flat in Australia. Tourism still heavily impacted, albeit our regional areas are picking up a little bit with some domestic travel. Food and beverage still remains sort of fairly flat as well.
Thank you, Harley. Henning?
Yeah, my name is Henning Siemens. I'm Regional Managing Director from CWS in the region of Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. As I mentioned, I'm from CWS, a 120-year-old founded company which offers rental solutions for different divisions as hygiene, workwear, uniform, healthcare, clean rooms, and new services. CWS is a brand of the CWS International and its subsidiaries, and it's 100% a holding of the Franz Haniel, which is located in Duisburg. We have roughly 11,000 employees which work in 130 locations in 15 European countries. And as we have 2,500 service drivers and we are reaching 500,000 buildings and 100,000 customers every day, we make an initial turnover about 1.1 billion euros. Company highlights of CWS are: we are a system provider on health, safety, and protection, and we are well known for sizable sales organization which offers like special trends, services, hygiene solutions, workwear, clean rooms, and healthcare, mainly on the European market. And our understanding is sustainability based on circularity. As we are a provider of rental solutions, we are really part of this circular economy and really sharing economy. Our aims that we have is like save resources, reduce waste, and really close the loops. Regarding to this COVID-19 that we are facing, is the pre-COVID situation was very good and stable in nearly all our divisions. But then as from March, it hits us very hard, and with the shutdown, we have a very different reaction in our regions, as also a different reaction in our divisions. For example, the German market was decreasing, but on the other hand, some of the divisions are really stabilizing this decreasing factor, like hygiene stands, disposal articles, and disinfection scales. So at least we were able to be service saved, and within the reopening, we find in some of our countries very unstable markets with different reactions from politics with spread into our products and services. So it's not easy to proactively be in terms of reopening and providing the customer with a perfect solution. Due to the different solution areas like hygiene, work, and clean room, customers are demanding a more flexible and transparent solution from our side. But I think there are also our opportunities that we go on the hygienic path and really come up with very strong strategic opportunities in areas of hygienic requirement, PPE, and all the stuff that is already also mentioned from Claire. So a consolidation of the market, customization, and really come to sustainability and really find a way towards the customer to prevent him with a flexible and transparent way. Thanks.
Thank you, Henning. Appreciate it. So now I'm going to ask the panelists to turn off their webcams, as we're going to show a short video clip from Mr. Pan Wee from the China Laundry Association. It's about 10 minutes. The audio is not great, but there is a subtitles, and the slides are very informative. So it's not your computer that the sound is not great on. So we're at about 10 minutes. It's a few minutes on the association itself, and then really in-depth or pretty valuable and in-depth look at the China market. So
Hello, dear America colleagues. I am Henry from China Language Association. 很开心通过网络这种特别的方式跟大家认识。今天我想与大家交流的主要内容分为4个部分。首先为大家介绍一下我所服务的机构，我们的工作定位以及我们服务的范围。第二，我将通过具体的数据来介绍一下中国洗染行业的状况。第三，谈谈新冠疫情对中国洗染行业的影响。这也是我希望和各位分享的重点。最后再跟大家探讨一下中国洗染行业未来的可能发展趋势。我们中国商业联合会洗染专业委员会，简称中洗委，是2000年开始筹备运行的，2004年正式成立，是经中国国家商务部和国资委同意，民政部批准的全国性的洗染行业协会组织。我们中洗委的宗旨就是加强行业自律，促进行业健康发展，展示中国洗染行业的新形象，推动中国洗染行业整体水平的提升。中洗委是由在中国境内的从事洗染服务、洗涤设备、洗涤化料和相关辅料产品生产的优秀企业，以及中国境内的各个地方行业协会所组成。我们现在有企业会员1000家，因此我们把这一由中国洗染行业优秀企业组成的群体称之为洗染行业优秀集群。我们为会员和行业提供了多种的服务，比如说建立全国性的行业标准和国家标准及相关的规范，开展行业调研，为行业企业服务，为政府部门提供决策依据。那么开展行业的培训，组织行业的专业性和综合性的论坛以及交流的活动。2000年，我们创办了中国国际洗染业展览会，目前我们跟相关机构合作来举办这项活动。我们还建立了自己的信息化平台以及行业的期刊，进行洗涤行业的知识的共享和品牌的推广。我们每年都会组织中国洗染行业的同仁进行出国考察，我们的身影目前已经包括了美国在内的11个国家和地区。今年由于情况特殊，所以说呢这项活动呢就没有组织。接下来我以2019年我们协会的市场调查数据为基础，跟大家分享一下中国洗染行业的现状。2019年，我们中国洗染行业的销售总额达到了1278亿人民币，比2018年的幅度增长了6.5%。我们习惯把中国洗染行业分成生活衣物洗染和公用纺织品洗涤2个部分。公用纺织品洗涤主要指的就是为酒店、医院以及餐饮等公共领域提供洗涤服务的机构。那么2019年，中国公用纺织品洗涤的总营业额的收入为639亿元人民币。我们在生活衣物方面呢，洗涤呢主要是指的针对的家庭和个人生活的用品、衣物进行的洗染服务。2019年，我们全国生活衣物洗染的总营业额的规模与公用纺织品洗涤的总体规模相持平。 洗染行业的产值总体来说呢，增速呢在趋缓，增长速度我们从原来发展较快的年增长率待到16.67%，那么逐年开始下降，那么到2019年的增长速度在6.5%，也就是说由高速增长逐渐变为稳定增长。2019年新冠肺炎这个在全球爆发，这给我们中国以及世界各国的服务业都带来了很多的负面影响。2020年以来，我们中国洗涤行业和其他行业一样，也经历了许多的变化和调整。今天我跟大家大致分享一下这个过程。疫情爆发以来，对公用纺织品洗涤的这个卫生要求，我们有了大幅的提升，特别是为医疗机构提供洗涤服务的工厂，消毒呢更加严格，同时工人的防护的级别也在提高，所以说致使洗涤的成本大幅增加。在营业收入方面，我们以今年的第1季度为例，中国整个行业比较2019年的同期收入下降了44.6%，其中医用纺织品洗涤收入仅达到了2019年同期的50%，那么其他的公用纺织品的洗涤收入，那么也就是2019年的30%左右。目前中国的疫情已经基本得到了控制，所以说我们洗染服务呢也基本的恢复了常态。但是由于与海外的交流在减少，经济的活力呢也是低于了往年的同期。由于这个经济活力呢相对降低啊，我们洗涤的相关的这个供应链的发展呢也受到了一定的影响。比如说我们新的这个服务模式的推广，资金的流动、配套设备的供应等等，在一定程度上也受到了影响。所以我们非常期待我们全球一心，共同战胜疫情，让世界的经济交流发展恢复到常态。最后，我再跟大家谈一下我们中国洗染行业可能发展的趋势。第一，就是绿色发展是一项非常艰巨的任务。这些年来，我们中国政府对环境保护的这个力度在加大，出台了很多关于环境保护方面的一些政策。那么这一点也对我们洗染行业的环境保护提出了更高的要求。那么第二点呢，我想呢，就是行业市场规模将会逐步的扩大，我们生活衣物的洗染市场会稳步的增长，同时也是各种经营模式呢都会得到很好的发展。在公用纺织品洗涤的业务领域呢，范围也会扩大，规模也会增加。同时，我们目前也更加关注养老洗涤服务的这个布局和发展。第三点就是区域化的格局在逐步形成，实施区域协调发展战略是新时代国家的重大战略之一。那么我们公用纺织品领域呢，也要进行合理的布局，引导建设规模化的洗涤服务的园区，那么实现区域的协同发展。在生活衣物洗涤领域呢，会逐步完善它的这个服务功能和设施，实现各种经营模式的合理布局。第四点，我认为也是最核心的一点，就是节能降耗将会成为我们的主攻方向。我们一直认为节能降耗是实现环境保护和利润增长的关键所在。各位朋友，这就是我今天想跟大家分享的内容。希望我们更多的国际友人，我们行业的朋友 能够我们进行多多的交流，我们不同的国度共同的梦想，希望我们经过共同的努力，让我们的家园天更蓝，水更清，衣更洁。感谢大家的倾听，再见。
Thank you, Mr. Pond. So we'll now ask the panelists to please turn on their cameras so we can bring them back for the Q&A. All right. We're missing one person. Hopefully Henning will make it back.
I'm back.
Great. All right, so from your first question here, we'll just I'll go around the group here. So as multinational companies with diverse markets, what can you share about the recovery and prospects of recovery depending on where you operate? So Jim, I'll start with you in North America and South America, and then we'll go around the group a little bit.
Okay. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, the recovery process in North America is slower, and in the UK it's much slower than what we're seeing in our other countries. We are concerned today with restaurants trying to reopen, outdoor dining going away, and schools starting to reopen. That the spread of the COVID could have an impact on the recovery, and so we're hoping that it comes back sooner than what was predicted earlier today on this call. But we have some concerns about it. In our other countries where we have more of a uniform mix, we seem to be doing okay, and the recoveries aren't complete, but they're a long way ahead of what the food and beverage industry is in North America and the hotel industry is in the UK. So we need the quarantine restrictions to be less so that people can go to London, they can travel, and we need to stop the spread of the virus here in the US, which seems very difficult to do, so that we can get restaurants back opening. But we are very concerned about the number of restaurants that have closed, that will not reopen. I believe long term people want to go out to eat, they'll want to go back to restaurants, but they might be different restaurants than what we're currently serviced pre-COVID. So we have some challenges ahead of us in North America and in the UK. Our other businesses, Brazil, you mentioned, seems to be doing pretty well despite the spread of the COVID infection down there.
Great, thank you, Jim. Juha, you want to talk a little bit about your markets, and then we'll go to Henning.
Okay, yes, sir. This is of course very difficult as we are living in the middle of the pandemic, and like in Europe now, it's clearly the second or third wave, depends on how you count, is picking up at the moment. But I think it's we are talking about, is it going to be letter V or U or L or whichever letter is going to be the recovery. But I would say that it seems to be evident for us that it's more like this K letter, as some industries are picking up quite fast and some will take some more time. And once again, the example of this hotel industry, which seems to be the case, that the leisure time personal traveling is picking up as soon as it is possible. The good evidence was that June to August, this domestic leisure time traveling was really happening, and I'm sure that as soon as the borders open, people are anxious to travel again. But then the business traveling is a different story. I'm referring to this report was introduced to us a few minutes earlier, is that most likely this business traveling will take 2 to 3 years before it will recover. I think at the end of the day, not despite whatever is this let's say the recovery letter illustrating, I think our industry is in a good position. First of all, that we are so important for the societies, And then also that most of the countries where we are present in 24 countries, the penetration rate of our services is still so low, both in Europe and in Asia. And I think I'm quite optimistic that despite if the general GDP is not developing that fast, but our industry will have an opportunity to grow much faster than the general trend is going. So overall we are looking quite optimistic, even though, like I said, we are still in the middle of the pandemic.
Thank you, Johan. I think that's a good point. I mean, I know that in the United States, the industry typically grows a little bit faster than GDP, and I think that's pretty typical around the world. So even when it's down, as you said, penetration and products and new things that come out, and the essential or critical elements of the business do bring that out. Henning?
But I want to highlight that even the recovery is now depending on the different divisions or products or services that you are in, also on the different industries. So at least you get a mix and match between the areas that you are in. And the recovery is also now spreading down on a different local area. So at least could be that some countries or part of countries are recovering very well, and other are going back into a lockdown. For example, in Germany, partly lockdown. And so it's not easy to really have a great picture on the recovery of our industry when you come to a bigger region that you are in. So I think it's really a mix and match in the next months of the reopening and providing the customer with perfect solutions, and also like having like different reactions from politics, what we have to cope in our economy, and that will lead to more flexible months that we are facing in the next 1.5 years, I think.
Thank you, Henning. Harley, anything to add on Australia or your markets?
Look, similar sort of themes. I think travel and tourism and business travel are heavily impacted within Australia now. You still can't really travel in between states. Where I live here in Victoria, we have a curfew. Food and beverage restaurants aren't open. Can't leave my house more than 5 kilometres. So we've still got heavy restrictions, whereas other parts of the country are opening up. However, domestic travel is still heavily restricted, and international tourism, which is a major source of income for Australia, is pretty much non-existent. So we're facing similar challenges there. Healthcare market, has been affected by elective surgeries in some areas, but that's bounced back. And saying earlier, we're actually seeing increased revenue through other opportunities, particularly reusable textiles, aged care outsourcing, those sort of things. So there are certainly some opportunities there, but challenges, I think, in the future with food and beverage, our stadium type businesses, which we support as well, are not operating. So similar themes to the rest of the.
Thank you, Harley. Johan, you mentioned earlier that you want your company to be known for sustainability and kind of the environmental conscious and efforts. How do you see that changing under this kind of environment? Do you see any differences there? I know in the US, kind of the things that are, we're a little bit behind Europe in the environmental issues. We take it very seriously here, but we're behind in regulatory issues and overcoming those. And we think that COVID will delay some of those kind of initiatives. So just your thoughts around sustainability?
Well, I think there's a push and pull on sustainability on the market. Of course, like you mentioned, that the regulators are putting more regulation in place, which is pushing the companies to be more sustainable. But I think even more important is this pull which is coming from the market, and that's why we see that the sustainability really needs to create added value for your customers. You are not doing only for yourself and to make sure that you are sustainable and taking care of the, for example, environment, but it's really that you're adding value for the customers. And I think we are now, the talk is more about upcycling rather than recycling, so that whatever material you are using, that you are able to after using it to really to create it to the format which is the value is at least the same that it was the original or even higher. So I think that's sometimes this sustainability is seeing that it's an additional cost, and it will, but we see and we have seen and are experiencing that that's actually the way to improve also your profitability in many ways. So I see that this will continue this trend despite the COVID.
Thank you, Juha. Anybody else have any comments on sustainability or the environmental issues, like Henning?
I think it's really like hygiene is really coming as a mega trend, also with disinfection, allowance control, and all these things that we are seeing right now. I don't think that this mega trend and this hygienic standards will go away after the pandemic. So at least I really think that we come to an increasing of the cycle business. What is the chance of our whole cycling business that we are in, and I think that we see an acceleration of this development phases that everybody wants to be at least on the sustainability board and really look off what he can do in his environment of keeping plastic free and really reduce our intensive of resources to the max. I think so.
Thank you, Henning. Anybody else to comment on the environmental issue?
Joe, certainly in Australia, major focus, from our customers and shareholders around environmental sustainability. Water is a precious commodity for us here, so we've had some good work here in recent years around reducing water, new equipment, and reducing utility costs. So we're getting that push-pull as well as an economic benefit, as mentioned earlier, and we've seen that, and our customers and shareholders are demanding it. So we need to be geared up for that in the future. So.
Thank you, Harley.
Joe, I would add to it, the sustainability of our products, I think became clearer as we started in this COVID crisis. And I think you were involved with our company in trying to convince states to use our products as opposed to disposable products. And so I think we can position ourselves to take advantage of this heightened awareness for being hygienically clean, and maybe we can get more tablecloths on tables that have gone away from that in the past. And there are other opportunities for our business to help as we come out of this COVID crisis.
Yes, Jim, thanks. There was Jim's referencing some animations we created with the help of not only ALSCO and some of our members here, but actually our European counterparts who actually, we had the videos translated into German and French, and as I like to say, proper English for distribution in Europe and the UK and Germany and other places around the world. And so that we thought that was effective. We had a big push from not only the federal and state here in the US, but to use disposable products. They sensed that they were implying they were more hygienic than the reusable products. And we highlighted the fact that they're not, but also focused on the shortages we had in PPE, particularly in the United States, where 90% of PPE that were used in healthcare, gowns, isolation gowns, scrubs, surgical garments, were disposable. In Europe, it's a larger percentage is reusable, and they had fewer shortages in Europe. And so we're trying to get a model here in the U.S. where there's a mandatory use of at least 50% reusable in your inventory, rotating inventory, so that we can maintain a supply when there is a crisis, such as the recent uptick. So it's a good point. Carrying on that, one of the things that we've seen again is an uptick in reusable PPE, gowns, surgical equipment, things like that. What other opportunities does the group see for the industry and/or threats going forward over the next few years facing the industry? So, anyone want to jump in or?
Sure, I can jump in.
Thanks, Juha.
Yeah. So I think in overall this pandemic period have boosted a lot of trends which were happening anyhow, but it's kind of accelerated things to happen, and I think it was quite well also described in the keynote speaker that this kind of period also separates companies from each other, and therefore I would say that the biggest challenge is, of course, to all the companies is to keep up with the changing environment and able to for example, digitalize their services as an example, keep up with the sustainability and so forth. So I think as at the same time, when those are really, I would say, threats, but even more opportunities. So the companies which are able to keep up with these ones are even stronger. And I think this also will then be good in general for our industry, as it's a very, for example, the regulation, it makes very difficult for any other traditional practices to take care of the textile services rather than using our industry, even more difficult. So I see this challenging changes more an opportunity than a threat.
Thank you. Henning, looks like you had a comment as well.
Yeah, I see it the same way as we are hearing from Claire that we will face some consolidation and customization. It will lead to, I think, a more faster way for new products, new services, and also like a new way on really pushing forward our hygienic special solution areas, and where we probably see a change to grow. And this way is, I think, a further concentration in the market for really finding best solutions for smaller customers and also for customers which demands our hygienic approach. I think so.
Anybody want to add anything else to that, or we go to the next question?
We have seen rental opportunities in areas like isolation gowns that you brought up, but we've also seen opportunities to provide direct sale to some of our customers who are trying to deal with this crisis as well. So that's been a new opportunity for us that we've seen in several countries. It's been exciting to be involved in.
Great, thanks, Jim. Thanks for sharing. All right, I got a question from the audience from our good friend Charlie Betteridge in the UK. And he was talking about, particularly in the hospitality sector, but all sectors, obviously there's pressures on cash flow and bad debt and those things. Where do you see the impact on your CapEx projects, your reinvestment in your organization, whether it's building plants or buying equipment or doing those types of things, reinvestment? Anybody want to volunteer?
Yeah, we are looking hardly what investments are really necessary, but we are not like stopping investment as we are reinvesting in our laundries, but keep a close eye on our bad debt and also on our cash flow. But as we know that we try or will improve in our laundries, we are doing some things.
I mean, you're all very large companies, so I would think that in your perspective, you've always got to be reinvesting, whether it's here, whether it's in Europe or elsewhere around the world, to keep up technology, digitization, automation. All those things will be impactful, and certainly there'll be some effort to continue that. Question here on your communications. So, how are you communicating or educating your customers? It's one of the elements that came out in our research we do here with our business pulse surveys, which we also did in conjunction with our partners in Europe. They sent out similar surveys. How are you educating your customers? Harley, you want to take that one, and then we'll go to Jim Kearns?
Yeah, sure. I think everyone says they have customer centricity, and we're focused on the customer, but I think now it's absolutely more important than ever to be close to your customers. And that's easier said than done too, with the social distancing and challenges that we have there as well, and lack of travel. We're still working really closely with our customers around, a lot of it's around education and health and what we can do around different products and assist with the supply chain, the resilience of the supply chain that was mentioned earlier, to combat the same challenges we've had here around disposable products and customers having digitally accessing those products, or the prices that they're being forced to pay for those products is creating an opportunity for us there. So it's really an education, sitting with the customers and educating on what we can do for them in those spaces.
Thanks, Harley. Anyone else want to discuss that?
So that's a good hint also from Claire as she is telling about customization. So we are building up a new strategy on the division and solution areas to communicate in the best way to the customer. And we are building under our brand CWS, like solution areas like hygiene, workwear, healthcare, clean rooms, floor care, and fire safety. to really come up with the best approach to communicate with the customer about the value and the benefits for the services that we are providing in the solution area, and therefore to be even more specific and fast in communicating in the several channels like letters, mail, social media and stuff, to really come up with this flexible and customer demanded solution. That I think is also something what shows this trend. Yeah.
I see that we are in a very fortunate situation in that sense that our services have a large number of different benefits, and it's for different customer segments they are value very different kind of benefits we are able to offer. So basically in our communication we definitely one message doesn't fit to everyone, and there's we need to look at the customer specifically basically, and at least the customer segment specifically. What are really the needs and pain points of that customer segments, and where we can help them. So not just the one solution or message.
So this crisis has pointed out to us that maybe our communication wasn't as good as we thought it was when we started, and as a result, one of the positive things is we are doing a much better job communicating with our customers, particularly as they ramp up, ramp down, ramp up, and so you have to be in constant communication with them to provide them the services that they need when they need them. But it's also improved our communication within our company when we're managing and Zoom meetings like we're on today. You have to do a better job of communicating, and I think that's one thing that one bright spot from this pandemic has been our improved communication within the company as well as to our customers.
That's a good point, Jim. I think we've heard a lot from our companies that their communications has actually improved with both their team members or employees and their customers, because you can do these Zoom things where you're seeing people's faces, maybe you're seeing them in their home, so you're learning a little bit more about them personally and building a greater rapport, a little more connection there. Sticking on the communications with employees, anybody want to add anything about, as big organizations, as you grow, your values and your culture, sometimes the inspiration for the business itself gets lost a little bit, and particularly when you have something like this COVID-19 pandemic. How are you continuing to push that culture out there? How are you communicating and motivating employees during kind of this time when there may be, you're laying off folks or you're consolidating and somehow shrinking? Any thoughts around that?
Yes, I think yes, the communication is the key here, and easy to build on what Jim mentioned. So we definitely have also increased a lot of communication within the units and the 2 units around the world, and that has really built the team spirit within the company even stronger, and the culture than earlier. I see then in a bigger picture is that it's a lot about that. Are you able to build your organization with the strong purpose, and then from the day one when inductions started to make sure that your culture and the values are well understood, and then of course you need to walk the talk, otherwise it will be diluted very fast, and that's everyday job for all of us to make sure that we keep a good communication and walk the talk.
Thank you. Anybody else anything to add on that, or we'll go to the next question? Great. One of the questions we have here is, what are your thoughts on the long-term impact on your customers and the industry? Trends that you see as accelerated, maybe some trends that we haven't really witnessed yet, that we haven't really touched upon. We talked about travel, we've talked about hygiene and PPE. Are there any other trends or things that you see out there that you want to share with the group that may be an impact of COVID over a longer term?
We're seeing a bit here, Joe, just in the way of localization, again around that supply chain, the government, customers looking for local supply chain and local products as opposed to offshore. I think that localization trend will continue.
Yeah, I think that's a good trend. I think you're absolutely right about that. Anybody else?
Maybe to mention, maybe Jim mentioned it in another answer a little bit. The same topic is also that to really be integrated with the customer further, just to keep up with their forecast and when their demands, when the situation are changing, daily basis. In some cases, that you need to be very close to customer and integrated with their demand, and so able to serve them and build your own forecast. So I think that's a very positive what is coming out from this COVID period as well.
Yeah, thank you.
And I also think that, like, with increasing the digitalization and really perhaps then at the next step increasing the IoT thing, that all pieces and processes will be in long term be connected and really be visible in terms of a track and trace. And this will heavily impact our cycle business as well. So at least I think we're now on a path of really having a huge next step on the digitalization in comparison also together with a hygienic mega trend. So I think we are on a good way, and even the COVID-19 is really then fasten up our path that we are going here.
Thank you, Henning.
Joe, I would add that I think it's important that most of our businesses in our industry were, classified as essential businesses during this crisis, and I think that's something that we need to build upon in the future and keep reminding people that we are essential business, and we operated during this crisis and we supported our customers. And I would hate to have that lost on people who, aren't really aware how important the services that businesses in our industry provide to our customers.
Thanks, Jim. That was a big dialogue with the associations. We, through the European Textile Services Association, ETSA, coordinated calls on a weekly basis and then a monthly basis between the national associations that are partners of this group, and included us, which was very nice. And one of the big issues was where we were being recognized as essential and where we weren't. We were having issues in the US state to state. I know in Germany they were having some issues in getting recognition as essential and critical, and other parts of the world. Even though it's obvious, right? We're delivering healthcare laundry, you really can't operate without it, but it really took some effort to get there. And I know that all the groups worked on that. Keeping in mind my colleagues in the national associations groups, are there any standards or regulations that you perceive, commercial versus home laundering, for instance, or workwear or healthcare, hygiene issues, anything that are regulatory or legislative in nature that you might recommend?
I think that even this higher standards that we have, for example, the RKI standard in Germany, they will be now fixed and also spread over, like in all the food industries. And I think that even all the external washing will be then going down, and it will come up to really be already to really ensure this high standard that we are really washing like hygienic clean. And I assume that this will then speed up our businesses in terms where an hygienic cleaning is really necessary and should be the standard.
Thank you, Henning. Yeah, we agree. We've been really emphasizing hygienically cleaning. We've seen that picked up. Even the UK implemented some hygiene standards through their organization to help their launderers that were typically in the hospitality space service in the healthcare space. I think, and that was able to keep some of those laundries more operational. Any other thoughts around regulations or standards that need to be developed?
Maybe not directly to regulation, but I think the one thing where our industry still has a lot to do is the general awareness of our industry, and I think now there is really a momentum for that. So we should be utilizing that the general awareness about our industry. It's still a lot of space to improve on that area, and we need to work on that together.
Yep, I agree. And I think that's an area where we are working together. I know that, again, ETSA has a nice program they've put out there. We're one of our primary, we did a what we call it a strategic change initiative, and there were 3 or 4 key factors that came out, and number 2 was promoting the industry, awareness of the industry. 3 was hygiene, and 1 was advocacy. So those are certainly our marching orders going forward as an organization, and we certainly share that with our national association partners around the world that have a lot of the same emphasis. We're running out to here on time. We've got a few minutes left. Do either of you, does anybody have any questions for their fellow panelists before we move on to the final couple questions? Anybody have any questions they want to ask the rest of the group here that they want some insight into? All right, let's talk about supply chain. Did anybody have, what kind of supply chain issues did we have? I know it was mentioned, Harley mentioned that we were going to focus on local supply chain. Did anybody see dramatic supply chain issues? And if so, in what products were you seeing those supply chain issues?
We have partly some supply chain issue with disinfect stuff and with some of the dispensers to provide disinfection and some of the products which we are really ordering in Far East comes some slightly delay. But that was all until now.
Good. Anybody else have any? I know we had some masks initially, but that picked up. Some of the disposable products that were going into direct sales. I think we have the same issues here with the dispensers and getting hand sanitizers and those things. But again, it's been an opportunity too. So it's been an opportunity to be able to sell those products which we didn't have before, either in a rental or direct sale capacity.
I think the whole industry really grabbed up very fast to really produce a mask, even textile masks who are really washable. It was really fast that all the shirt manufacturers are really shifting their production sites to really produce masks in a massive amount. And there, I think it was no really shortage in this one.
Yeah, we saw a lot of new folks get involved in the manufacturing of PPE, particularly gowns and masks and those kinds of materials. And I think what I've heard from folks is just you need to be careful of where your vendor base is, that you're buying from reputable vendors with good products. And I think our industry, we have a good set of supplier partners, and I know we have a lot of them on the call today. So any comments about the working with your supplier partners through this crisis?
Well, it's quite obvious that the same way that we need to be integrated with our customers, we need to be integrated with our suppliers, and that's the way forward. So the whole supply chain is working smoothly, and because I think it's the trend is that everything needs to be delivered on demand and on time, and not so much based on stocks, which you always have in the wrong place and wrong time. So,
great.
Yeah, I think there's opportunity to sort of work jointly too with promotional activity with customers as well. We've had some good examples of that with some microfiber products, those sort of things where we're jointly marketing those into our customers. So it's critical.
Thank you, Harley. Any other comments? All right, well, I think we'll start wrapping it up. I think we've got a lot of our questions here. I don't see any additional questions on the question board. The only question there is there was a question about the findings, the research project we did. Again, we'll post how you can get access to that document here shortly. Again, I want to certainly thank Jim and Juha and Harley and Henning, as well as Claire and Bob for being on today, participating in this discussion. I think it's some interesting research that we've, as they mentioned, it's sort of a starting point for what we're working on going forward. I want to again thank everyone for participating. Again, as a reminder, the Global Textile Services Market Analysis Report, it's available on the TRSA website at www.trsa.org/globalmarkets for you to get more information about it and purchase the research project. And with that, I'd just like to conclude today's webinar. I want to thank all the panelists, the keynote speakers, and for everybody who participated on the webinar today. Thank you very much and have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Stay safe.
Thank you, you too.
Bye-bye.